Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and Stacy, episode 465. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host at StacyPan89 on Twitter. Stacy, how are you doing on this string of victories for you?
Um, I don't know what you're talking about.
I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the Knicks have not lost since Boston. There was another game that happened. Um, yeah, doing pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, well, the Knicks win, doing a couple games in a row to bounce back from a pretty deflating loss to the Celtics. They beat the Pacers 128-115, and then they defeated the Hawks in an overly and unnecessarily dramatic game, 149-148 in overtime, the highest scoring game of the NBA season so far. We're going to talk about plenty of that stuff, but before we do that, I do have to make a few announcements. First, we that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are and you have not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merch, which you can find on our website at www.strick.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store, and there's all kinds of cool stuff on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. The Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, this podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Hobbies Bozos, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, along with Zach Blatter. And you get access to the Strickland Discord where the conversation never stops. So further tiers, there's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod, where I rant over the next few more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. And you get access to Strictly NFL, which you guessed it, is a podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Konstantin Metrikos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Let's go with a variety of additional benefits, like listening on pod recordings and merchandise discounts, and even potentially hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you, and none of this would be possible without BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with the odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So obviously the Knicks, they get destroyed by Boston. Again, they beat the Pacers 128-115. The final score actually kind of makes it seem even more competitive than it was. And they eke out a win yesterday in overtime against the Hawks. A lot of the conversation after these games, or from these games, has been about Tibbs starting Precious Achua. We know that Precious is not going to be starting once OG Anunoby is back. But he is starting now in his place. He is kind of a big wing-sized player who, in a pinch, can do some work there, but generally his best performances, at least for the Knicks, have come when he is deployed as a 5. I know that's a little bit kind of, it's not necessarily as clean or clear what position he's playing, given that he's playing with Towns. We know Towns is also a player who has cycled both at the 4 and 5 in his career. That said, I think there's one specific thing about Precious starting at the 4 or 5, however you want to put it, that makes those lineups somewhat gross at times offensively and not entirely well fitting, and that is his fit alongside Josh Hart. Josh Hart, really good player for the Knicks, obviously. He has done more than I think anybody could have expected given what was given up to get him. That said, he's not a particularly strong three-point shooter, and teams defend him as such, and teams defend Precious Achiuwa as such, and that creates problems for other Knicks players because there's no space to operate inside the arc. And I think that is why there are times where you see Cat playing more on the perimeter and isolating from the top of the key and all that stuff. And look, against the Pacers and the Hawks, who are not the greatest defensive teams, especially the Pacers without Miles Turner, you can find a way to get around that because the talent of Jalen Brunson, the talent of Karl Anthony Towns, and just the general kind of offensive level you have as a team can carry you through against lesser opposition than the best teams. But against a team like Boston, we see what the disadvantages are in a very, very strong way. And yesterday, obviously Deuce he came into the game with some type of abdominal contusion, which he must have aggravated because he did not come back after halftime. It's impossible to not play Hart and Precious together some with OG out, and given the other options we have, just our overall lack of depth at this point in time. But I think what's frustrating for me is like, it's one thing to have to do that, and very specifically when you have to play them at the forward spots together, right? So when it's those two plus a big, with Towns, it's a little bit more tenable, but we've seen them both play with Huck Porty, and that's brutal. I mean, it's just atrocious. Like there's no chance. The only opportunity you have to even kind of pull even offensively is to just own the offensive glass. But it's just not a very viable strategy. But what's frustrating for me, and I don't know, I mean, this is just me, is that you're not trying to like actually avoid that as much as possible. He's actually just leaning into it. And again, yesterday, I understand, okay, Deuce, abdominal contusion, whatever, it happens. Games like Boston to me are just very concerning because it's like that was the most predictable outcome based on the decisions you made. And then you have to go, and then you go to Deuce in the starting lineup in the place of Precious, so you play small, and you're playing, and you make up the gap that you've given up, but you're expending so much energy coming back to the game that as soon as they make a run, you don't have any counters really. And then even went back to that Precious and Hart look at the 3 and 4 against them in the fourth quarter anyway, and that's when they totally blew it out and sealed the deal. I don't know. I guess my question or just statement is like, that's what's frustrating me, and it's concerning to me because I don't find it surprising. It's actually the most predictable thing, and we know this because this is what happened last year. Like we saw this play out last year in real time, and then after a month of starting Precious at the 4 next to Josh Hart at the 3 and Hartenstein at the 5, which was worse spacing obviously than Cat, he finally adjusted and put Deuce in, bit the bullet, played small, whatever. He's not doing that this year, or hasn't done it yet this year, I should say. Although he did play Deuce at the start of the second half against Boston, which on its face should indicate like, oh, I understand this, and therefore will make the necessary adjustment moving forward. He gets away with it against the Pacers and Hawks. I think games they were undermanned. And to Precious' credit, he did play really well against the Hawks, as much as you can expect from him. But and there were personnel limitations given Deuce's condition heading into the game. I just don't really understand why that's his preference. And to me, it feels very reactive. It feels like you're more focused on how you match up against opponents versus how you get the best out of your team. And it's very, very clear you get more out of this team with Deuce in that starting lineup than Precious. Now, when OG's back, we don't have this concern, right? OG will start and, whatever, we move on. But it is concerning to me in the scheme, in the grand scheme of looking at what this team is hoping to achieve and the teams and coaches that you have to go through to achieve them. Because you cannot play a team like Boston and afford to put out obviously deficient lineups that don't give you an advantage on either end of the floor for even 3-minute stretches. And we saw this play out in the 2023 playoff series against Miami in game 6, where at one point in the second quarter, while the Knicks were up, the Knicks were carrying an 11-point lead heading into that quarter. He put out a Deuce, RJ Barrett, Josh Hart, Hartenstein, and I forget who the fifth guy was, but it was another basically non-shooter type player. Obi, probably Obi, on the floor. And that lineup got torched and immediately conceded the lead or gave up the lead. You can't do that. Like this is how fast games can change, not just in the regular season or not just in the playoffs. You even see in the regular season. So that is just my overall thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think it's fair to I kind of hear all sides of this, right? I think um, it the Knicks are a little thin right now. They're thin in general. Any starter would create issues. I think losing any starter. If you lose Bridges, if you lose Hart, obviously if you lose one or two superstars, and if you lose OG, there's just not a lot of there's not a lot of flexibility. So I get that. We know that Tibbs, for better or for worse, is going to err on the side of size. This is what led to starting Alec Burks at point guard. As you mentioned, this has led to some really backbreaking sequences in playoff games. But I do think I don't want to say he's playing with one hand behind his back, but there are constraints to how much he can do. Um, I think part of it also is Precious is a little unpredictable. I do some of this has to go on him. I don't think he's being done many favors being in a lineup with Hart and even Cat as a spacer, because you want to run screens with Cat, right? So you're asking Precious to do things that aren't really in his skill set. He can't really space, and it's not like he's an on-ball option. Um, I think what's really concerning as well. In general, I had higher. Forget the other part of that. I had higher hopes for Precious this year, I think, than what he's done. I actually really thought the Precious Cat lineup could work well, and maybe it could if you put Deuce out there with them. I haven't looked at the on-offs there. But I think some of that does go on Precious because it was very encouraging to see him last year, how he developed. And we just haven't seen that same level on a consistent basis. And that just might be who he is because of the kind of wild nature of his game, particularly on offense. What I think you describe as CTE moments, it's not always going to work out the way you'd like. It's just tough to be reliant on that. And I think that's part of it. Going back to
Precious, Deuce, Towns with Hart off the floor in 102 minutes is a minus 6.32 net rating. Deuce, Hart, Towns in 318 minutes with Precious off the floor has a 16.25 net rating. And Josh Hart, Deuce, and Precious with Towns off the floor has played 131 minutes with a 1.77 net rating.
Yeah, so that tells me that's actually higher samples across the board than I thought. That tells me, right? One, it's not just spacing, and it's really, I mean, Hart is actually until recently has been very cold, and I think he's probably back down to his career averages. Was shooting the ball better than he has, right? But I think what that tells you really, yeah, a lot of it is just Precious is a tough fit on offense, and that trade off right now is not worth it on defense. But there isn't a whole lot. There aren't a whole lot of other options, right? Especially when OG's out. I do think, yeah, like would I've started Deuce? Absolutely. Over Precious, to be clear, not over Hart. But I think I can see, I can see, why Tibbs is doing that. I just think, yeah, like the data and just looking at it, like Precious doesn't give you enough on defense to offset that, right? I do think there's maybe something to the fact that he's also just he's just not a great fit with Cat. I guess if you made Precious the center of your pick and roll offense and used Cat as Steve Novak, maybe that would work better for him. But that's not something the Knicks should ever do. And so that lineup has not been as great as I would have hoped, given how well Cat played with Gobert last year. will be interesting to see if they have some of the same issues when Mitch comes back and plays with Cat. But kind of like the TLDR for me, it's everything you said. I think you just that extra level that a coach like Missoula can get to, that a coach like Spo can get to, they might need to win a playoff series, particularly when there is a level of parity and you don't have the talent advantage, and
or if you're at a deficit.
yeah, I mean, there's probably two series at least where they're at a deficit, and even if they play a team like Cleveland, where I think they're on even ground talent wise, you're going to need the coaching to make a difference sometimes. I think it's fair to be concerned there about are his tendencies when push comes to shove, even if he's shown flexibility. When push comes to shove, is he going to be able to go against his gut instinct when it's needed to take you over the top in a playoff series? I think like his kind of stubbornness and sticking to it is really good in some ways, especially in the regular season, but for the reasons you mentioned, and just kind of like how this roster is balanced on a bit of a razor's edge given the lack of options. I think some will say that, yeah, like you can't blame Tibbs if he has fewer options, but I think to your point, that's when you need to be at your best, right? That's when the best coaches really shine.
Yeah, and again, like yesterday's just a weird game in the sense of you didn't. Deuce comes in with an abdominal contusion, and then he's not even an option in the second half. So you can give him a little bit more grace, but I don't know how much that means, because to me, after you watch that Celtics game, there should be no question what the starting lineup is. It shouldn't matter who you're facing. And to be honest, like Precious is not having some significant impact on the defensive end of the floor, which is presumably what you're making this decision based on, right? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, the offense might be a little bit clunkier, but we're going to be much stronger defensively with this look than we would be in the alternative, which hasn't been the case, right? That just has not been the case. Again, so like if you look at the trio of Deuce, sorry, just trying to get to the right one. So Hart, Deuce, Towns on the floor together with no Precious. That's 128.64 net rating. 128.64 offensive rating and 112.38 defensive rating. They hold opponents to 34% from three, 54% from the field overall. So if you want to say they're getting a little lucky with 3-point variance, maybe that's the case. I would guess that Deuce is having an impact on that because he's a much better point of attack player.
And it doesn't drive a 14-point gap, right?
Yeah,
maybe a couple of points if you want to add.
And I think there's value there. Now the alternative, obviously, with Hart, Precious, and Towns on the floor. Just gotta scroll to the right one here. That is again 2.17 net rating. This is per PvP stats. They have 126.77 offensive rating, which is kind of nuts. They have 124.6 defensive rating. It's 2.17 net. That is buoyed by an extremely strong rebound rate. They have so let me get to that. Precious, Towns, Hart together on the floor. Again, just trying to load this up here. That unit together on the floor has played 170, whatever it was, however many minutes. And they have a 34.5 offensive rebound percentage. So like extremely, extremely strong offensive rebounding team. Not so much defensively where they've struggled. They've been bad, flat out. So I mean, make of that what you will. Like it's, and I don't know. I guess maybe at times it's more frustrating the moment. It's easy to react as a fan. But there are also moments and stretches where it's just like you actually do have another option, right? Like in that Boston game, you did have another option. You chose not to use that option to start the game. Then you came to the realization that you needed to at halftime. And then you start the next game with the original lineup. Like that is to me extremely frustrating and concerning. And it's the type of thing that concerns you in the greater grand picture of things. Not when you're playing the Hawks in fucking February or
The
you
last
know,
game before the All-Star break. So
yeah,
I
like these games are. I mean, you look around the league last night; there are a bunch of weird fucking games, right? Like the Bucks went into Minnesota yesterday and won 103-101 with no Giannis or Dame, right? The fucking Pacers needed overtime against the Wizards to win that game. Like, so it just there's weird stuff going on. There are guys that are like,
checked
you
out.
know, yeah, they're checked out. And I think that was part of it with the Knicks yesterday. I think they were just like waiting for the Hawks to roll over. And they were also maybe trying to make plays that didn't need to be made. Um, and they got burned and it became a highly competitive game and they couldn't get stops and whatever. But like it's just that is one thing, right? That's its own separate thing. Um, and we can talk about that. But like that, you get into rotation stuff that's weird. And then you get into some like situational things with Tibbs where, again, maybe there isn't a firm answer, but I don't entirely agree with his choices. Like, okay, for one thing, right? You don't call the timeout yesterday when Towns is clearly having an issue inbounding it. And as a result, you turn it over. Dyson Daniels gets fouled. Honestly, really, we're lucky that was not an and one, or that he didn't convert it and make it an and one. I don't know. Like you have two timeouts there. If once you see the team is struggling to get the ball in bounds, I think you got to call that as a coach. I don't know. To me, he froze up there. He didn't call it. Then he has an offense only possession at the end of overtime, which Brunson hits the game winner on this, so it's fine. But it's Precious, it's Hart, it's Cat out there. It's a very situational possession. Like to have two non-spacers on the floor in that spot is pretty rough. And this is what Brunson was dealing with the entire rest of overtime and the end of fourth quarter. And to his credit, like I actually am okay with Tibbs doing that because he did try Payne and Brunson together, and that group just was not working. Preferably, you don't try that maybe in crunch time, a lineup that you haven't used much, but it's neither here nor there. So I'm okay with that. But in that very specific possession, I think you need to have a spacer on the floor for Precious because he's not going to take Hart off. Because even if you miss, right, you're down one. So even if you miss, there's under 24 seconds left on the shot clock because there was 24 seconds when you got on the game clock in that situation. You need to like you're gonna foul if you miss the shot anyway, right? You're not playing a defensive possession out. So to me, just getting another space on the floor is value there. Again, it doesn't matter. Brunson makes a shot, so we're all happy. Timeout. Hawks call a timeout to drop a play. There's 11.8 seconds left. He takes Brunson off. The Knicks are out of timeouts, so he takes Brunson off the floor here. I understand this because you're playing for the defensive possession here. I personally think that's a mistake. They did not get burned for it, obviously. I think it's a mistake because there's a world where the Hawks drop a play, they get a quick hitter, and you have the ball with 6, 7, 8 seconds left. And you don't even have an opportunity to get your best offensive player on the floor. Honestly, the one guy in overtime that was able to create any offense was Brunson. And he wouldn't have been on the floor in that situation. I really, again, there are no easy answers for this. I could be wrong, right? And sometimes results make you the winner, right? I don't know what it looks like. I don't have a simulation machine in front of me to run stuff and tell you how many times you could expect this thing to work out or that outcome or this outcome. But on its face, those two decisions at the end of overtime, I don't love them. I don't love them.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many offensive rebounds the Hawks had last night. That
19. They
is,
had 13 in the first half. They had 6 after that, which is okay. Kudos to the Knicks for rebounding better. But I mean, if you're making the whole bet, right, of like, we're going to play double big, a lot of that is predicated on owning the glass. The Knicks did not own the glass.
and I don't think they generally have with Towns and Precious in together. They have with Akporti.
They have, but I think when it goes bad, it goes really bad. Like you saw in the Boston game, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's not a big strength, right? I think Hart and Towns have done a good job, but this like Bridges is not a particularly physical rebounder. And Precious, I think, is better on the offensive glass, but like I said, defensive rebounding requires focus, and kind of just an instincts on where to be, and at times that Precious can be a little hit or miss on. I mean, I think it sometimes you just need reps. I still, I think there's still some upside with Precious, but you've seen with Mitchell Robinson how lost he was as a defensive rebounder. He said chase too many blocks, would lose position, wouldn't box out. Obviously now that it's a complete 180.
There's also something to just like not, if you don't give up dribble penetration, defensive rebounding is a lot easier. And Mitch is obviously a much bigger deterrent than Cat or Precious in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, like I do think I do think within offensive rebounds, if they started tracking Kobe assists, like actually, you know what I'm talking about, but
Yeah.
like actually, where yeah, the big got the rebound, but it was because the guard drew the big, right? So I mean, I think just I'm sure there are teams that track this, right? Is our rebounding because we're not physical enough? Is our defensive rebounding poor because our bigs are not doing a good job boxing out? Are they chasing 20 blocks, or are they just being put in no-win situations because we give up too much dribble penetration? It's worth noting for what it's worth, right? Precious did have a good statistical game.
He was good. No, like my issue with Precious, he played. Honestly, any criticism of Precious should just come with the understanding of like, this is much less about Precious. Like, we know what Precious is. Precious is a viable rotation player, but he's a lower end rotation player. He's not if you play him 42 minutes, you cannot expect him to be, like, he's not OG Anunoby, right? Like, he's not going to be good for 42 minutes. It's just a different level of player. So I have this is much less to do about what Precious is as an individual, and it has everything to do with over reliance on him at times in situations where you don't need to, and also putting him in lineups that exacerbate the issues that come along that you already know are going to come along and present themselves with Precious.
Yeah, and the Knicks had a pretty uncharacteristic 17 turnovers. 14 of those were from the starting lineup. 13 were from the three primary ball handlers. Towns had 7. Brunson and Bridges had 3 each, right? Brunson, 8 assists, 3 turnovers isn't such a big deal. But, I mean, how much of that do you think was a result of the spacing? How much of that do you think was just Cat, especially just having his typical brain farts at a more frequent level?
You talking about the defensive issues?
Turnovers.
Oh, I think a lot of it was just Cat. Honestly, like I mean, I think, well, it's all connected though. Like Cat can be sloppy with the ball, and honestly, this is where I'll continue to say it. Watching him more and more in the regular season, I think I would guess that a reason that he's been a playoff dropper, not to the degree we saw with Randall, but a reason he's a playoff dropper is if I'm an opponent, all I'm doing when he's on the perimeter is I'm sitting on his right hand. I'm not letting him drive right. Like he can't drive left. When he drives left, he ends up taking weird fading shots, or he ends up having to spin back to his right. So you sit on that right hand. And that's why he needs to have a quicker trigger with the 3, which he took 8 threes last night, he took 8 threes the night before. Like, that's good. We need more of that. But like it is connected because you know his tendency as a player, and you should know that obviously self-scouting is important too. So the Knicks know what his tendencies are as a player. If the spacing is poor and you know this player who likes to get downhill and attack the rim, like it's going to be harder for him, and he's going to have some turnovers as a result. Now, he had an efficient scoring night anyways, because he's just that good, right? He's just that talented, but it's less than ideal.
And it's against a team that it's against a team with a lot of these ball hawking, no pun intended, defenders, right? So
yeah, and the other part of this that I think is worth noting, the best stretch the Knicks had in the second half came with a lone big on the floor, and then nominally, then 4 nominal perimeter players, however you want to designate them, guards, wings, whatever. Their best stretch in the first half, aside from the kind of opening quarter, I guess. I don't even know. Like the entire game was so weird. So parsing through it is odd. But they were able to stretch the lead out from like, it was hovering, from like 8 to 9 to 10. It was hovering there for much of the early second quarter. They were able to push it out to 18-19 with a lineup that was Deuce, Payne, Shamit, Wing, right? Big. And that to me is illustrative of the point being made. It's like, don't overvalue needing to have X dimensions on the floor. Like, oh, I need the 7-footer, and then I need the big wing, and then I need wing 3, and like I think it's more important to value skill sets, especially when you're at a talent advantage. Like the Knicks are the more talented team. You have the superior talent. So you should be playing like that. And your goal should be, how do I maximize my talent on the floor? And yes, to that extent, defense is 50% of the game. So it's important to value that as part of it. And therefore, I understand the baseline logic of Precious makes us better defensively. Here's the problem. It does not bear out. It's not bearing out in the numbers at all that Precious next to Cat is any type of defensive, fucking
lockdown unit.
Yeah, like it's not there in anything you look at. Their success is driven by their offense, weirdly enough, which is largely because of rebounding. So I'm willing to admit maybe the aesthetics of it make me feel worse about how they operate offensively than it is in reality. But I don't need to admit is that in totality, it's a very, very average lineup and is a sieve on defense. It has been bad, flat out bad defensively. So I don't know. My argument to start Deuce, and again, I'm not going to harp on this too much as pertains to yesterday's game, but in the future, if OG Anunoby is out and you have the option of healthy Deuce or healthy Precious, I do not give a shit who you're playing. Really, I don't care who the opponent is. I think you pick Deuce, and I'll tell you a few reasons why. Deuce is the only other good point of attack defender they have on the roster, aside from Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges is the only other wing on the roster who can at least give you somewhat of a facsimile of what OG Anunoby can provide in terms of help defense. You are getting the closest thing you have to your starting lineup with, defensively anyway, with Deuce instead of Precious. Precious neither has the help instincts and ability that OG provides, and it exposes Cat in a way that is majorly damaging, and it puts a huge burden on Mikal, and teams know it. I mean, how many times did Trey call for a pick and roll? Oh, first one didn't work. Set a second one. And it's like, you can't expect Mikal Bridges to cover for Cat for 24 seconds on every possession when Cat's having a game where he decides, I'm not going to put my hands up. I'm not going to move my feet. I'm just going to hang out here. Like, it's not fair to him. So that's my argument for it defensively. Offensively, two things. Obviously, better spacing. No question about that. Other thing, Deuce is probably the best screener on the team for Brunson right now. Probably is. Which is its own consideration and concern to have. But just forgetting the long-term concerns of what I just said.
You're just talking strictly the physicality of the screen, right?
This physicality of the screen, the understanding. Like, there's an innate understanding of, like, how to yeah, and also, like, I'm going to flip the screen. I'm going to rescreen, whatever it is, ghost screen. Like, there's an understanding between the ball handler and the screener, and Deuce and Brunson, for whatever reason, have a really good connection on that in a way that he doesn't seem to have with any of the bigs. I don't know what was up with Towns yesterday as a screener. Towns goes through bouts of, like, good screens, bad screens, not screening, whatever. But, like, in terms of if you're just looking at Precious versus Deuce gives you more offensively, unquestionably, just from the spacing perspective. And then when you factor in that he's a better screener for Brunson than Precious, I don't know. To me, it's like, live with the size disadvantage, man. Just live with that, and it is what it is. Yeah, that's those are my thoughts on it. Again, forget yesterday. If you want to just toss out yesterday's game because it's weird and we're shorthanded and whatever, I think that's fair. There's small things to note in the game that I think are worth noting and carrying forward in the back of your, bank that in your memory. But yeah, I mean, I do take the point of like last game for All-Star break, second night of a back-to-back. You could sense with fans yesterday, it was almost like, let's just fucking win this game and get to All-Star break. How do you think they feel? You know what I mean? Like, how do you think the players feel? That's how fans feel, where they're like, I mean, these guys are, of course, they're looking forward to a week away from just like playing serious basketball. And in the case of some of them, yeah, they're looking forward to like, man, I can't wait to just cut loose for the next few days.
Josh
Of
Hart.
course. Yeah, I mean, all of them are.
Well, no, two of them won't, but like,
Yes, they will. No, yes, they will.
You don't think they're going to take all the All-Star activities seriously?
I think they are going to be hungover for several of the All-Star activities. If my experience at the All-Star weekend I attended was any indication, I would be shocked if any player were to not be a little bit foggy.
We should tie up and move on from this precious point. And kudos to the Knicks, given all of that, to pull out it. Look, the Hawks are not a horrible team. They beat the Knicks twice, so kudos to the Knicks to pull it out. And given the circumstances, Precious for playing a good game. Do you think so? Deuce is coming off injury, and his play has been like, on the one hand, I think DJ from Knicks Film School posted this. His impact stats are actually really good, even though his efficiency has tanked. He's been really bad at the rim. Do you think, in any way, I'm not saying we use the word doghouse. Do you think there's a little bit, he doesn't have quite the same trust with Tibbs just because of this tough stretch, and that plays a part in a decision like yesterday?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you think Deuce, because of the injury and just kind of the fact that he's been a little bit poorer stretch, particularly shooting, even though the impact numbers are so good, do you think like Tibbs has lost a little bit of trust in him? We've seen him go through this at times with quickly when he was in a shooting slump. Do you think that plays into a decision to start Precious over Deuce?
No, because I don't think he trusts Precious that much either. Like when we have our full team, or at least with Mitch out and when OG is healthy, the full team, right? In that sense, he hasn't really trusted Precious that much either. So, no, I don't think that's it. I think it's purely like he wants that big wing-sized player there, and that's just going to be his bias. Like, it takes a lot for him to get away from that bias, right? We saw that play out last year.
And to be fair, this Hawks team has caused issues for the Knicks with their length. To your point before, I think it helps more. Like if you can have Bridges, like if Bridges has to guard Trae Young, right, then that creates more issues, right? But if you have another point of attack defender, it leaves you some size to throw at a guy like Daniels or apparently Knicks nemesis Zach Brisachet, right? So, but there's definitely many different ways to go about it. I do agree in general, unless like Precious really gets to a different level defensively than he's at right now, or you're switching or using him more in a creative way. I definitely agree that I would echo your sentiments. I think it's generally going to be a better call to start Deuce.
I mean,
and in general, stagger Precious Hart Cat a little bit.
I just need to like. The data now going back to last year and again this year, at some point it's the numbers and the numbers. Like this is like the RJ Barrett quickly thing again, where it's like, yeah, but like the size, and it's just like, dude, who gives a fuck? If one guy is better next to your other small guard, and every fucking every single pairing, any granular stuff you look at still points to that, it is what it is. Like, you can find some singular granular stuff. And I'm not, look, I want to be very clear. I am not saying Deuce is having this type of impact that, Quickly necessarily did, or that Precious is being as destructive in ways that RJ Barrett was for us, in terms of like the lineup data and stuff. But it's in the same vein of things where it's like, are there granular things you can look at and see like, well, this looks good for Precious in these lineups? Yeah, of course. I think that's, but if the broader picture is murkier, that should inform you what your broader choice should be. So your broader choice should be play Deuce more. Now, obviously within that, we understand, and I understand this. This is where I am sympathetic to Tibbs, is like, we understand that, especially shorthanded, some of these bad, unideal lineups are going to kind of like, how do I put it? They're going to have to be used in the current situation. Just try to minimize how often you're using them. Don't just lean into it from the start. That's it. That's all I'm asking for. All right. I want to shout out somebody who probably, I mean, honestly, I think he is very deserving of a shout out. Payne. Payne played a great game against the Pacers, I thought. And I thought he had another very strong game last night. He's having a nice season for the Knicks on a veteran minimum. He's shooting 37.5% from three, 42.8 from the field, 54.1 EFG.
Should we
He
start the
has, I
campaign, Six Man of the
believe,
Year campaign?
yeah. He has the best on-court rating for the team so far this season, I believe, at a plus 11.3. He's got a plus 7.1 net swing. And he is having the second best 2-point shooting percentage season of his career at 50.9% now. Sorry, he's third best, I should say, 50.9%. I don't know. I just thought he was worth shouting out because, look, the game obviously ended up going to overtime, but his stretch at the start of the fourth quarter did give the Knicks significant breathing room. It went from a 3-point game to a 12-point game, and he was largely responsible for it, getting to the rim, finishing, even through contact, and generally playmaking at a high level too. So I just wanted to give him a shout out because he's been somebody who I've been up and down on, but he's been in a good kind of groove here, and it's nice to see. And the Knicks need it again, especially with how thin this team is. You just need as many guys to step up as possible.
Yeah, it's I think one thing I was thinking about, I think people were talking about this in the Strickland. One thing that I think there's a lot of small guards, especially, have had a lot more success under Tibbs than they've had elsewhere. I mean, even going back to the Bulls, right? Nate Robinson had kind of a resurgence there. DJ Augustin was successful there. Aaron Brooks had a bit of a resurgence. Obviously, we've seen, Quickly is a very talented player in his own right. And he worked hard, and not to take anything away from that, but he really thrived under Tibbs. Deuce has developed well. Even he's not a small guard exactly, but Derrick Rose had his last really great year coming back to play for Tibbs with the Knicks. And I think, campaign is in a good place for, Tibbs, I think, runs a system where he wants his guards to get downhill, runs a lot of pick and roll. The, the spacing has been better, right? Now they have a stretch five, so it's not just Tibbs. And I think campaign, I mean, look, you talk about, this was a guy who was drafted late lottery, not particularly physically gifted. He's quick, but not like De'Aaron Fox or something. Has solid size, but it isn't very bulky. He's a little skinny. Has an awkward shot. He's lasted this long for a reason. He was getting minutes and having some positive impact against the Knicks in the playoffs last year for a reason. And I think, for a guy it's a little paradoxical and weird, but he is self-aware to the point where, yeah, he does have this helter-skelter, herky-jerky style. But I think that's okay because he knows that's his role, is to do that for 10, 15 minutes a game, right? When you need some offense. And so there are times when it feels like, he's hijacking the offense or doing too much. But for the most part, I think he has a solid understanding of his role. He's professional, seems to get along well with the other guys in the team. Can be surprisingly, I don't want to say effective on defense, but he has some decent instincts that'll show up when he makes plays, even though on the whole, he's not exactly a player you trust playing a significant role on defense. But look, that is your eighth, ninth, 10th guy. Those are the kind of guys you see on championship teams where it's not a straight liability. It's a guy who can add some value. And it's certainly more pleasant than, I think about times when the Knicks had to rely on guys like Anthony Carter in the playoffs, right? So in that sense, we've complained about the depth a lot. I think there's multiple issues, right? I think I was expecting Precious to take more of a leap than he has. Mitch has been out. They don't really have any wings. I don't think they're counting on Dadier, but Shamit hasn't been particularly impressive. But I think Payne was a nice signing. It's a vet min. And I'm not going to say that, Leon did it again or this is one of his biggest moves, but it's a good contract. And they got a guy who probably had interest from other teams. But, he came here and I think that speaks to the level of credibility this and the relationships this front office has built too. So, all in all, yeah, tough to be disappointed in the signing. It's not like Payne is some perfect player, but I think it's been a solid signing for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that I don't even really criticize Tibbs for this. He doesn't trust Payne to play with Brunson. I understand why. I think there are situations in games like yesterday against a Hospital Hawks team where you can probably risk that and maybe not just risk it in like crunch time in the fourth quarter. Maybe try steal some minutes in the second, third, whatever. Either way, I get why broadly that's his thing, and he's limited in a role because of that. But he has done as well as you could reasonably expect, and that's really all you can ask from a veteran minimum signing, right? I also thought it was nice to see Shamit. I know he only had 4 points yesterday, but I thought he played well. I thought I think you're seeing him get a little bit more confidence back in terms of like the strength of his shoulder. He's got and this is on him and it's on the team. And I do want to get to this because I'm very, very interested about this. But he needs to be able to get off more threes, and he needs to be willing to pull the trigger on some of them instead of pump faking and driving in and pulling up in the mid range or trying to attack the rim. He needs to be willing to take those shots too. Okay, going back to the Knicks. The Knicks are wonderful offensively, very, very good. Here's a fun fact, though. They are now down to 27th in three-point attempt rate on the season. Some teams that are alongside them, some of these are good offensive teams. So it's not necessarily a death knell that you're not a high three-point attempt rate team. But of the good offenses that are around them, you have the Pacers at 26th. You have the Nuggets at dead last, 30th in the league. So it's not necessarily the end-all, be-all here. But the Knicks are not a high-volume three-point shooting team. And I think especially now with OG out, it exacerbates the issue. But they are having trouble generating volume of threes. Do you think that this is about personnel? Do you think that there's more that can be done from the coaching side of things? Or do you think it's maybe a little bit of both?
You're talking about generating more threes, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a multitude of things. The thing is, like, I think you always want Cat to shoot more. So did you say attempt rate or is that threes per game?
3-point attempt rate.
Okay. It's a combination of things. Look, when your best shooter is a 7-footer, there's just a limit kind of on how much they're going to shoot. For example, right? I think because I was talking about this with Prez before the season, and I was like, Cat should be at double-digit threes per 100. So Porzingis before this season was at 8.6 and 8.2 the year before in Washington. He is up to 10.2 this year, but that's Porzingis, right? Who not only is a really good shooter, but that's more of his role in the offense, right? They have other guys who they'll run screens with. It's not to say they don't get on the ball near the basket, but a big part of his role is floor spacing, right? Wemby, I'm sure, is something crazy in terms of attempt rate. But it is notable that Cat is only at 6.7 per 100. Why is that notable? Because his previous really 5 seasons, his attempts per 100 were his 3-point attempts per 100 possessions were 10.8, 8.8, 7.0, 8.1, and 8.0. So he has come down. Besides that one season where he was at 7, his 3-point volume has come down. One might argue, if especially the people who do not love threes, or especially from bigs, that was also the last time Cat was on an All NBA team. He made the third team that year, when he took only 7 attempts per 100. So there's some trade offs. But what I would argue is he's shooting 44% from three. So to go down from last year, when he was shooting 42% from three, like he needs to, especially on this team where you don't have a lot of, um, you know, you don't have a ton of shooters. That is important. I think, uh, I think you look at Jalen Brunson. It feels he is a great pull up mid range shooter. I don't know what and he's efficient. He's a pretty good. He's a pretty. I mean, his numbers are good for pull up 3-point shooting. It's just still, I think, it's gotten progressively a little. It's probably the one thing that he hasn't, like, he's extended his volume and especially catch and shoot 3-point. So his overall 3-point volume has improved, from Dallas, but like the leap in terms of pull up volume isn't as much as, like, there's still room to grow there, because if he really gets to that level where he jacks sometimes, there's even that, it's crazy to say Jalen Brunson has even more upside. Having said that, though, from last year, he's also down in terms of 3-point volume, 8 attempts per game. Um, it's sorry, 8 attempts per 100 possessions, right? Um, so I think with both of those guys, one thing is when you're on the ball, especially in this offense, when you're asked to do a lot of creation, one, when you have the ball, it's tough for the defense to, like, lose track of you, right? Last year, Cat was in Minnesota. He's playing off the ball a lot more. Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert are involved in the action, and he's just he's going to have more spot up opportunities there, right? This time, especially when Brunson sits, he's kind of running the show, so you understand that, right? But you look at, both of their 3-point attempts being down per 100 is not great. Mikal Bridges, 10.3 last year, down to 8.3 attempts per 100 possessions this year. That I think is fixable, because he does. I think Bridges has been really good. I'm not going to say great, but he's been argue about the picks all you want. He has been a pretty positive impact player this year for the Knicks. But the one thing that is a little bit of a frustrating habit for Bridges is he passes up these open threes. So I think there can be a bunch of reasons, right? I think all three of these guys are asked to create more than they have in the past. Not Brunson, I should say, but especially Hart, or especially Bridges, Hart, and Towns have been doing more creation. So that could be a factor there. I also think that, just in general, they don't have a ton of guys who are comfortable pulling up from three. It's really just Deuce and Brunson. And so, just they're like, if everything is catch and shoot, that's going to happen. And I also it would be interesting to me, like, the Pacers basically did this with the Knicks last year in this playoffs. And with a lot of teams, this is kind of their strategy. Be a little bit more, like, bait the teams into attacking more, right? Close out on 3-point line. It's not just close out, but it's also like, yeah, we'll trade in the rim protection. You can have some fun in the paint, right? Because we're gonna get threes on the other end. And I wonder if teams are shifting a little bit more towards that against the Knicks. Now, having said that, the results have not been good for those teams. But you do wonder if you're facing a team like, I think what's more than just the averages and the attempt rate. I think I don't want to say it's a concern, but what you'd like to see is some games you'd like to see the Knicks be able to ratchet it up and get to 53s. If they're playing a team like Boston, or if they're playing a team that is going to score on them, because there's a lot of teams that can. So yeah.
Yeah. I think there's stuff that is going to be limiting to their ability to generate threes. Honestly, I probably underestimated how much losing Dante would hurt the overall team 3-point volume because I thought getting Cat at the 5 would raise it more than it has probably. That being said, one thing I will say, and I've been I've been critical of Brunson about this. Nice. I've been critical of Brunson about this throughout the year is not getting his 3-point volume up. Worth noting, after Julius went down last year, his 3-point attempt rate went down to 29.7. So 29.7% of his shots were threes after that point. This year, it's slightly higher. So it's kind of in line with not having somebody else who can kind of get into the paint, draw two, and spray out. Like we know Cat can drive and get to the rim, and we know he has a presence in the post, but he's not particularly great at generating threes for others, right? That's just not kind of.
I actually think his passing has been pretty good. It's just not at the volume of like Jokic or something. But
I mean, but that's the point. That's like he's not going to generate a volume of threes, right? It's just not going to happen. So they don't have another guy that can generate a high volume of threes. The only other guy that really does it is like Josh Hart in transition, and Payne sometimes, but not really because he doesn't have that type of gravity even though he's pretty good at getting into the paint. So Brunson is your sole source for this. Teams know that, and that makes it easier to prevent threes, especially if you're able to switch, which a lot of teams like Houston, like the Hawks yesterday, like Boston are able to do and not give up those easier openings. The other part is because Brunson is the sole source of creating threes, generating threes in the half court for others, that also leads to him taking less threes, even though the easiest fix in some ways, and we can also be frustrated by his decision making at times, is to take more pull-up threes. Sure, but if you're the one guy that can consistently initiate and create offense in the half court, then it puts a burden on you, and you have to constantly find a balance of like looking for your own offense, taking pull-up threes, whatever, versus getting into the paint to try and draw defenders and create for others. And if you look at it, for example, Jalen Brunson is taking whatever. I got to pull up these numbers here. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is actually taking less threes than Jalen Brunson this season. And like Jalen Brunson, the reason I bring him up is like Jalen Brunson, he carries an inordinate load as the primary shot creator for his team, as the guy that can actually draw attention, draw to the ball, and generate threes. For the season, Shai has a 27% 3-point attempt rate. Jalen's is at 31 and change. Like this is a high load these guys are carrying. 31.6 for Brunson, which by the way is only last year was 31.9. So it's in the same ballpark. I think these guys are carrying a load that is very, very difficult and puts pressure on them to get into the paint at high volume every single night. And if you have that pressure on you every single night, then yeah, guess what? Like your 3-point attempt rate probably just isn't going to be high. Just the reality of the situation, or maybe not ideal or whatever. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a guy who is, 61 true shooting at 29.4 usage, being the sole guy who can really consistently initiate offense for your team in the half court. It's a pretty impressive season that Brunson's stacking together, even though he probably won't get the total credit he deserves. I mean, to that end, I thought his performance yesterday was fucking fantastic down the stretch. I don't know how many players in the league can really do what he did with that level of spacing, with that lack of any advantage being created via pick and rolls. How many players, and basically having to isolate against Dyson Daniels for most of this. I don't know how many players can do it. I don't know how many players have that ability. He was special. They don't win that game without him. His overtime was fantastic. Even as close to the fourth quarter was fantastic. And, again, he is the gift that keeps on giving for the Knicks because I'm just going to repeat it. Like, I don't know how many players are capable of doing what he did at the end of regulation into overtime given the pressure of the situation, given the quality of the defender that was on him, and given the just suboptimal spacing.
What about De'Aaron Fox?
Yeah, I'm sure he could do it, man. Awesome. One time, the greatest star guard to make one All-Star ever.
I know they're sick. I think I think another thing I would highlight is I think we made Dante is a good point. But one, I don't think there aren't a whole lot there aren't a whole lot of guys who are like that. Fuck it, I'm just gonna shoot, right? Like OG is a capable shooter, but has never been some super high volume guy outside of the corners. In general, he's never been a big above the break guy. Bridges until last year hadn't really jacked up a ton of threes. I think that's starting to come up, but I would ask this too: how much do you think this is not the first team, the Knicks team we've seen where they pass out of a lot of open threes, right? Or they pump fake out of a lot of open threes. How much of it is this is clearly a team that prioritizes rim pressure, and I'm not saying that's even a wrong choice, right? If people talk about the threes versus twos, there was there's an article or a tweet or something that came out, but essentially, for the first time in a while, points per shot on twos are actually higher than threes now. It's telling you teams might have overcorrected with the 3-point boom at least a little bit. And that's without counting the fact that when you get into the paint, lots of other good things happen. You can generate another three, you can get to the line, you can generate better opportunities for offensive rebounds. All of that I get, but how much do you think the Knicks taking fewer threes, besides all of the personnel and issues that we talked about, how much of that is kind of a conscious choice for their offense? Given we know they prioritize the offensive glass, we know they want folks to get into the paint. Tibbs loves those things. Do you think there is a little bit of a schematic choice here in terms of their 3-point attempt rate being a little bit dampened?
I don't know, to be honest. It's very hard for me to reconcile the Knicks having this pristine shot chart over the last couple of years versus what they have now, which is not pristine. But is it what I've really struggled with this year? Even though they have obviously the second best offense in the league or whatever by offensive rating, so obviously the choices they're making are in aggregate good. At times, it does feel like there's a lot of randomness going on and a lot of read and reacting and guys kind of cutting into the same space. And I don't know what that's about. Again, when I talked about attention to detail, is something I've been harping on the last few days. There's a drive against the Celtics. Towns is driving and Hart cuts down the lane to the side of the lane that Towns is driving. I don't see how that helps. I don't and to me, it's you're chasing an offensive rebound there. You need to be spaced out. If you're going to crash, you got to wait a little bit longer too. You can't be right next to him. And those are the small things that I see a lot of that are weird and concerning to me. And then you look at the shot chart. It's look, you're going to shoot a higher percentage of mid-range shots when you have Brunson, when you have Bridges, right? That's just the nature of it. So I'm not that worried about the volume of mid-range shots. Not from Brunson anyway. From Bridges, I am a little worried, but that's not a recent concern. This is something that's been ongoing with him the full season, right? He's, for whatever reason, just not willing to attack the rim with force. And that is frustrating because there are times where it feels like you can get to the fucking rim, go, and he prefers to settle for the mid-range pull-up. He shoots it at a high enough clip that it's hard to be completely enraged by it, but it does feel, it feels like you're leaving a little bit on the table there. I don't know if Tibbs is on him about that, get to the rim, or hey, you can take more threes. You need to be taking more threes. And there are times you've seen him take more threes, but it's not always consistent. I don't know. I guess that's really my answer. So I don't know. I think that there are a lot of factors going into this. And some of it is simply just not having a quick trigger 3-point shooter really on the roster, right? Their quickest trigger guy is probably Deuce, and he's not Dante. He's not, and he's not a really. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of movement shooting from him or him being used as a movement shooter, and that's something that you could do with Dante. And they've had a guy like that on the roster pretty much every season, right? First season, they basically like bullied Bullock into doing that. Second season, Fournier comes in, whatever his flaws were as a player, really, really good movement shooter. He set the record for threes made in the season, which was then broken by Dante last season. So they've really had these options that can give you volume 3-point shooting, right? Even in the year in between where Fournier is basically out of the rotation,
Grimes.
before Dante comes in, Grimes shot a high volume of threes, quickly shot a volume of threes, right? Like you got that volume from other sources. McCall, OG, Hart, Towns, like they're just not going to be volume guys, and none of them can create to help Brunson get his volume up. So it's a tough situation. Now, as far as do I think like Tibbs can do, I do think there are things Tibbs could do more of. Like you should have more. I think there could be more structured stuff off ball to free up shooters. Now, here's a problem with some of your off ball actions. Again, you don't have good screeners. Don't have good screeners. Your bigs are not good screeners. Cat's probably your best screener. He's not particularly good. Mitch is not a good screener. He's not. We know Precious is not a good screener.
They traded probably their best screener, to be honest.
Yeah, Jericho Sims was probably their best screener. He's gone. Huck Porty, I think, has the potential to be an excellent screener, but he's not really going to play consistently, and it's whatever. So that's not a factor this season at least. But if like weirdly, I would say like we'll see what Mitch and Kat are like obviously together, and there's reasons to be optimistic about it for sure. But it feels to me like just screening prowess in general is something they'll need to address from their big man rotation. And it stood out to me in that matchup against Boston, because while you can say, well, Keita is not really a presence. He's not going to spread the floor, and Cornette no longer spreads the floor, and you can live with Horford shooting threes or whatever. Like all of those guys are good screeners, every single one. And being a good screener puts pressure on your defense in ways that, part of the reason I think Brunson himself is finding it difficult to create threes for others has to do with our screeners don't help him get separation, which can force defenses into rotation naturally. And you saw that in the Boston game where like our defense is put in rotation because McCall can't get around the screen like quickly or stay in front of his man, or Deuce can, or Hart can, or whatever. And now you're having to make rotations, and it's swing. And it doesn't matter that Cornette can't shoot or Keita can't shoot or whatever, because they're doing the initial job of creating that cascading effect that can happen. So that's my thoughts on it. Like, I think there are things Tibbs could draw up in terms of better things, more actions off ball.
But I'm talking about kind of the organizational philosophy, right? Has prioritized offensive rebounding, paint touches a lot. Do you think I feel like they pump fake out of a lot of threes. Maybe that's just a bias a little bit that they have, which I'm not even saying is a bad thing. Obviously the results are good, but curious if you see that too.
I mean, I think they pump fake a lot, but I don't think that's because that's just some of these players they have are not comfortable shooting tight contest threes. Like they don't have, just forget like Malik Beasley. They don't have a Malik Beasley on this team. Malik Beasley would do wonders for their 3-point attempt rate, but they don't have a guy like that on this team. Not a single one. It is what it is. And I would also say, like, I think the paint touches thing, most teams value that, right? That's like kind of a universal thing.
But you might bias one way or the other, right? Boston probably, the Knicks players, and I wonder how much of this is a Tibbs thing. Again, I'm not making a value judgment here, but I would imagine Mazzulla might be biasing his players in a different way than Tibbs would, right? In terms of when you get the ball, this is how you read and react, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen this before, but I think this is not, to me, they're not, you can watch, I mean, you could, if you were really bored, you could go and watch every single one of their attempts at the rim. There are very few times I watch some of their attempts at the rim and feel like, should have made the swing pass there. Like, and if I am going to do that, like a lot of times it'll be somebody who I don't think should or expect to pass much, right? Like I'm sorry. I think I'm not going to expect Karl Anthony Towns to start making incredible reads when he starts driving to the basket, right? That's just not a thing that's part of his game, really. And you have to live with that, right? To some extent, players are who they are. You can try and make gains, but he's 28, 29 years old. Like, he's probably not going to unlock some higher volume or some higher level as a playmaking force off the dribble. Bridges has never been a particularly great playmaking force, and he doesn't have the gravity to kind of collapse defenses and draw defenders to that level. Josh Hart may be the best one, but in the half court, he's not going to have that type of ability. And then OG, like, come on, give me a break. Like, not there. Deuce,
You don't miss OG creation?
definitely not. OG, like Deuce, no. Campaign, no. Shamit, no. Like, this is just not a roster that has that type of guy. And that, I think, is something that you have to figure out long term. Like, how you have to find ways to be able to create more threes, because ultimately, and we had a comment put in our post game yesterday by Kenny Meir. Ultimately, like, when you play Boston, you're never going to match them on 3-point volume, right? That's fine. You don't need to match them on 3-point volume to beat them. But the discrepancy cannot be where it was. Like, you're not even fucking halfway to their total. And fine, if you're not going to take threes, whatever, then you have to be able to stop them from taking their preferred volume of threes, which is very, very hard to do. But it cannot be both, right? It cannot be Boston gets 55 fucking threes and the Knicks take 25. You're just, the math to overcome that is so, so hard. And that's, again, this is not me saying you have to get up 55 too. You've got to get closer. You have got to be closer to that 38, 40. You have to. You have to have the ability to do that. And this, I think, is a hidden reason why the Knicks have not been good at making comebacks this year. They cannot generate 3-point volume. They don't have guys that are comfortable taking off the dribble at volume. Because of that, that's an issue. They don't have guys that can put pressure on the rim and collapse defenses other than Brunson to generate those threes. Like, they don't have the mechanisms to generate the necessary 3-point volume to make big comebacks. They don't. And that is why, to me, this is a team that is a front-running team. Like, I don't think they're soft. I don't think that they have a weak mentality. I think they have an issue with a very, very specific aspect of the game. And that aspect is key to making comebacks in the NBA in 2025. Think about how many games we watch on a nightly basis, and you're like, I mean, we say it now as like common knowledge, right? No lead is safe in the modern NBA, right? With the way teams shoot threes, no lead is safe in the modern NBA. I would venture to guess we're one of the safest teams to have a double-digit lead against in the modern NBA, because we just don't have the ability to make
Once you
threes in a
control for
minute.
talent, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I would rather have a lead against the Wizards than the Knicks, but
No, of course. But like we, and honestly, the Wizards' point is somewhat illustrative. Like, you can be a bad team and generate threes. This is not to say that the Knicks should just chase 3-point volume for like the sake of 3-point volume. You want to generate good 3-point volume, right? Like, up the quantity of your quality threes. But like, just looking at this, right? Here are the top team. I'm just going to list the top 10 teams in 3-point attempt rate. Boston, number 1, Chicago 2, Golden State 3, Cavs 4, Minnesota 5, Brooklyn 6, Miami 7, Utah 8, San Antonio 9, Charlotte 10. So, this list, there's 2 things I get from this list, right? 1, 3-point attempt rate in and of itself does not guarantee or particularly need to be a core pillar of your offense. But also, even if you're not the most talented offensive team, there are ways to generate a higher 3-point volume. I think, given the quality of shooters the Knicks have, right? Brunson, OG, McCall, Karl Anthony Towns, Deuce, even though he's having a little bit of a slump this year, Campaign, maybe Shamit comes back and he's good, whatever. They can up the volume and generate a higher quality. I do not think that they're going to be a top 15 3-point attempt rate team this year. I think that ship has sailed. But they can be better than bottom 4 or 5, whatever the fuck they are. They can be better than that. And I think it's okay to ask and expect them to be more than that. Even if we can also accept there's just a ceiling on how high you can push that volume given some of the personnel and roster limitations that Tibbs is dealing with.
And also, let's
And
also
honestly,
be clear.
we talk about Dante a lot. We talk about Dante a lot in terms of upping the three, how he helped increase the 3-point attempt rate. We probably undervalued how Hartenstein was able to help manufacture that too.
I thought you were going to say Randall.
No, but Randall. I mean, no. But to be fair, yes, Randall as well.
I think Cat gives you at least. I think Cat gives you more than what Randall did as being able to generate open threes. Having said that, the team that made that trade, that traded Cat for Randall, you can add, and Dante is 5th in 3-point attempt rate, but and Dante's out, right? But I do think Cat is able to make the same passes out of the post. I actually think he's more effective at them than Randall. But I do also want to be clear, it's not just roster limitations, right? This is an elite offensive rebounding team. They have a couple of guys who are just monsters in the mid-range, right? Is it frustrating to see Bridges pass up open threes and then and take a mid-range? Sometimes, yeah. But, I mean, is he still shooting 60% on them or whatever? It's been a good shot, right? I think more than the overall 3-point attempt rate, which like when you have the second best offense, if we say to Tom Thibodeau, hey, you need to take more threes, he would be perfectly well within his rights to say, fuck off. We're an elite offensive team. This is one of the best Knicks offenses maybe ever. But I think it's the concern is when you need to ratchet it up, right? Either because you're falling behind or you don't have good answers on defense, right? That is where it's a concern. And it is noteworthy because I think DJ posted this again. They're against bottom 10, top 10, and middle 10, their offensive rating doesn't change much. They're consistently an elite offense, but their margin for error reduces because their defense is much worse against top 10 offenses. And those are the kinds of teams they're going to face in the playoffs. And when you cannot rely on your defense, which again, against the top teams, they haven't proven that they can consistently do that, especially the top 2 or 3. I think they've done a good job against Memphis and Denver. That's when you need to have, some alternate strategies to, you can't just have a good offensive performance at that point, right? You need to be able to match the other team. And, especially when that team is an elite offense that is also playing like one against you. We've seen that in both the Boston games. We even saw that the Dallas game was a little weird, but, and I don't know what's happening with Dallas, side note, but I think, more than just the average 3-point attempt rate, I would like to just for them to be able to hit that gear when they need to. Or they're going to need to get back to last year's level of defense. If they're going to make noise against Boston, Cleveland, or OKC.
This feels like just a Cat conversation point to me, honestly. And Hart and Josh Hart, honestly, if we're gonna just call it for what it is, Josh Hart having extremely unserious attention this year on defense has been noticeable. Yesterday was he had another one yesterday. He's just falling asleep. There's one where this is a very, very annoying habit he has, but he does this one a lot. If he's defending you off ball, he won't and they're let's say they're trying to set a pin down for you, right? Or a down screen for you. He won't react to it until he sees you running, and then he's trailing you the whole play. He did this with Niang like a few times yesterday. So Niang was able to just get easy shots. And it's like he refuses to do the work early. So then he's chasing after stuff. And that can lead to wild closeouts, or he's not able to get back into play, or whatever it is. And it's like, this is the stuff that's just frustrating. It speaks to a lack of focus, lack of attention to detail, lack of concentration. I am not going to, again, this is not about one game. This is about things that have cropped up over the course of the season. And as far as I'm concerned, cropped up last year at the end of last season and into the playoffs, which was more understanding than given the workload he had to carry all of that time. And given what we were asking him, right? Playing the 4 for as long as he had to last season. Much more understandable then. Reasonable even then. It's less so now to me. And it's very, very, and these are bad habits. These are really, really, really bad habits. And it is hard to just get into the playoffs and be like, okay, now I'm focused and locked in and the bad habits are gone. Very, very hard to do that. So Josh Hart not having a great defensive season, I got to say that. Cat, I thought he started off the first couple months, honestly, playing about as well as you could reasonably expect Cat to play defensively. This last, basically since like the start of the new year, I would say has been very disappointing from him. Like, you're just seeing more games where just not moving his feet, not getting to the level. It's like he's not
Fouls.
getting fouls. Like, but it's like he's not getting to the level, but he's also not in any position to even play decent drop. He doesn't get his hands up. It's just like extremely lazy, and it's bad. But look, this is the player he is. He's not going to be a consistent defensive player. He's not going to give you a consistent defensive effort. He's not going to bring it every night on that end of the floor. And you have to hope that once Mitch is back, knock on wood, and when he's back and there's no worries about, his long-term issues, we get 15 to 20 minutes a game of Mitch. And that 15 to 20 minutes will give you 15, 20 minutes of he plays great drop, right? Really great drop defense. Obviously gives you elite rim protection. And then combined with that, maybe you can spare Cat more. And what Cat is actually good at on defense, and what he did well at the end of yesterday's game in overtime when he was called upon to do it, is switch out onto the rim. He's much better at switching than he is at playing drop. He's much better at these aggressive schemes, which, again, Tibbs does not want to use, does not like using them, refuses to use them in any type of consistent way. How did we trap Trae Young once yesterday? Did we once? Blitz him once? I don't think so. Like, this shit is, again, this is an all-year thing. This is not a one-time thing. This is an all-year thing. If teams know how you're going to defend something and they have quality ball handlers, they're going to fry you, man. It's that simple. It is really that simple. And your offense is good enough that on a lot of nights it might not matter. But there are going to be nights where it does. And guess what? When you play a team like Boston, when you play a team like OKC, you play a team like Cleveland even, like, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel that. So this is not just on Tibbs. This is not just on Karl-Anthony Towns. This is not just on Josh Hart. This is not just on whoever you want to point to. This is a collective thing. They've got to be better as a group. They've got to be more focused consistently as a group. They've got to have more in the bag. They've got to be willing to diversify the scheme more. And that, obviously, that last part is down to Tibbs, but it's an all-encompassing thing. And we'll see where we're at the end of the season, because you can accept losing to a team like Boston in the playoffs. I don't think you could accept losing the way we've lost the first 2 games to them, where it just feels like everything is easy for them on offense and our offense can't get out of the mud, really. Everything's a lot harder. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on the defense.
Yeah, I brought up the defense to the point where the Knicks are going to need to have a little more variance on offense if they are just going to be heavy defensive issues against the top teams, right? And for what it's worth, last year, even though the defense was better, it was not that good in the playoffs. Against Indiana, you can say that was because of OG, but struggled to stop Indy, right? Struggled to stop Philly as well. Certainly with Hartenstein in the game. So, but my point was more against these top teams, if you had the defense the Knicks had in that Heat series, even, or against the Cavs, right? And then this year's offense, or even that year's offense, it worked because the Knicks could just play really great defense. You cannot rely on that as much against the top teams. I agree with your points. I think there's also, with some of these players, I think another thing you didn't mention about, I would live with Brunson more at the point of attack, particularly against a team like Boston. You don't really have a choice against Boston, obviously, because you can't put him on Brown or Tatum. But I think that's an adjustment worth making. Brunson is probably better equipped at the point of attack than certainly to guard some of these wings, and it allows Bridges and OG to be wing stop, right? I think something that's hurt them is Bridges, as much as I think he's improved as a point of attack defender, and some of that was just washing the Brooklyn stink off, or just getting you back into the habit of playing serious basketball every possession. Um, he had to, he's still not great at navigating. He's a big guy. It's tough, right, with all that length and everything. Um, so you probably still would love to have Bridges and OG getting on wings, and or because I mean people talk about Tatum cooking Bridges. Where he really hurt them was in that pick and roll game. Part of that was, to your point, Cat was just. I mean, I think Tatum split the double with ease, or split the. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can call it a double, but basically ran Bridges into the screen, went right in between the screener and Cat, and threw out an easy dunk. Right, that shouldn't happen multiple times in a game. A lot of that is on Cat, but towards the end of the game when Bridges started fighting to avoid that switch, Tatum hit shots, but a lot of it was, I mean, I don't want to say garbage because he's a great player, but what I'm saying is you did everything you could as a defender. I'm not going to say Bridges just played poor defense or got cooked in that sense, because a lot of times that's not going to go in for Tatum. But you see there that he has to fight really hard to stay with that screen. That takes a lot of energy. So I think getting to a point where, and this is the benefit of some of the, again, of getting Deuce more minutes. It allows Bridges to do what he is probably still best at on defense, as well as obviously OG. We saw that in the Philly series, right? When OG was able to be off ball or even to switch on Embiid, he was much more effective at that than when they asked him to chase Tyrese Maxey. I think, yeah, to your point, Tibbs is a defensive coach. I think when they built this roster, they put Cat at the 5. Part of it they knew, or they seemed to have known, that either Mitch was going to come back, or if he didn't, they were going to try to get some kind of rim protector to play next to Cat, at least for part of the game. But I think when you make this trade, you are going to play Cat a lot at the 5, and you're obviously going to play Brunson a lot, who is not a great defender, to say the least. He's engaged. He's a lot better than he should be, but he's still probably a below average defender. You are somewhat betting, yeah, on Tibbs to it's like if you give Vic Fangio, that guy's pretty good, by the way. I think he had a pretty good game. If you give Vic Fangio a defense with some holes, you're telling him, manager, you are a smart guy. This is your thing. You should be able to manage around this or figure out how to maximize it. And against some of these top teams, Tibbs has left a little bit to be desired. Having said that, some coaches have their thing on defense, right? Vic Fangio is not going to turn into Spagnuolo, right? Just because of his limitations on defense. It may be unfair to expect Tibbs to as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely strategic tweaks to maximize this roster's defensive potential that can be made.
Yeah, and it's not so much like the ceiling of what it is going to be incredibly high. It's you need to figure out different ways and different pivots to have, and that's that at times has been Tibbs' biggest weakness as a coach. Right? Is it's not about finding new things. Right? It's doing what we do better, executing harder, and it's like, I don't know, man. When you play a team like Boston, I don't think just executing harder is the solution or the answer. So we'll see what happens. Look, I did fucking 30 minutes of Tibbs talk yesterday. So I in the post game, I'll just leave it at like the answers we want, the clarity we want with regard to how good is Tibbs. We're not going to get them in the regular season. Nothing he does in the regular season matters. It doesn't. Like, that's just the point we're at. Like, it doesn't matter to me if they win 55, 65 games if we go to the playoffs and get fucking waxed by Boston. You know what I mean? So that's what's important. That's the, keep the eye on the prize. Like, the prize is, how do we perform when it matters? And let's play that out. Let's see this season to its end. Let's see it to its conclusion. And then we'll get a full idea, a full totality of what not just Tibbs, the players. What do we need? What do we need personnel wise? What are the skill sets that are most important to add? What and all those type of things. We'll have a much clearer picture then than we do now. Um, Moving on. I mean, look, we also need to be clear. Like, I think it's very easy to get caught up talking about what we don't have, what we didn't do, and I get it because your expectations are now elevated. So the you're no longer just satisfied with like we're good, right? It's like okay, we're good, but what else? What else is there? What else is there? Um, but like the Knicks are the number 2 offense in basketball. They have the fifth or sixth best net rating in basketball, depending on your source. They have the third best EFG. They have the third best true shooting. They're actually at this point 8th or 9th in offensive rebounding percentage, depending on your source. They are there are things they're doing that are very, very good, right? They're a low turnover percentage team. They've actually now become about an average team in terms of forcing turnovers, which is a huge departure from most of their time with Tibbs as the coach. So they are probably doing more. They are running more aggressive teams, and I think it's worth noting that like we have to take this sample without OG Anunoby with some like you have to give them some grace here. We can't understand this team lacks depth and is kind of like very dependent on its makeup while at the same time dismissing losing such a key player, probably the player who brings balance to your team more than anybody else, right? Like we're seeing this now because without OG, it's like, well, you're gonna start Precious, you're gonna start Deuce. Neither one is a perfect solution. So you should give some grace to that. But like, without OG, I'm gonna include the Lakers game. The Knicks have gone 4-2. Their losses are to the Lakers and to the Celtics. They beat
Literally,
Houston.
it's the exact winning percentage for the season, 4-2.
Right. Exactly. They beat Houston. They beat the Raptors. They lose to Boston. Then they beat the Pacers on the road, which is not like it's not exactly like a dog shit win. And then they beat the Hawks yesterday in overtime, which again was an ugly win. There's no two ways about it. But I also think that the conversation on this team is super annoying. It's like, oh, they can't beat any good teams. They smoked the Grizzlies, who, by the way, you know what the Grizzlies record is? Take a
The
guess.
same, 36
Yes,
18.
36-18. They smoked the Grizzlies fucking 2 weeks ago. They beat them at 37. They smoked the Kings, who are playing better. Whatever. Fine. We want to include the Kings. They beat the Nuggets by 10. They smoked the Nuggets earlier in the year. They beat the Nuggets by 10. The Nuggets have won 8 in a row, by the way, into the All-Star break since then. Like, this idea that they've not beaten anybody good, they can't be good teams, it's just, to me, it's more like they haven't beaten Boston, they haven't beaten Cleveland, they haven't beaten OKC. So if you wanted to say those are the 3 teams that's all that matters, that's fine. Just say that. I
They
don't,
didn't
but
beat Dallas, but Dallas might be on life support at this point. So
and Dallas, yeah, and also their team is just totally different, right? Just who knows. But like the idea they haven't beaten any good teams is obviously nonsense. And I do think the Knicks exist in this weird tier of like, I don't fully believe they're going to win a championship this year. I mean, I don't believe they'll win the championship this year. I'd be like, if the Knicks won the title this year, I'd be pretty shocked. And I think they would probably have been the benefactors of injury, like a lot of injury luck to get there. But like, that's fine. I personally think that's okay because I'm viewing this as you had to make moves to create a window for yourself while maintaining kind of your place towards the top of the league. And then as we go on in the next year, 2 years, more moves will be made to add those pieces and then to open up the true title, like kind of like the title ceiling. If that doesn't happen, then yeah, we can look back at all this and say it was a failure. There's no way there would be no way to deny that. I just don't. I just feel like right now everything is being viewed as title or bust season, and it's almost like for like the window itself doesn't matter. It's just if they don't win this year, it's all failure, and this team is going nowhere, and we have no hope. And I just reject that. I think you have plenty of signs of. There are plenty of reasons to be optimistic about this team, and we shouldn't lose sight of that just because there are reasons to be worried about their ability to contend this year, and there are things that they need to do to contend in the years moving forward.
yeah, I mean, I think it's 2 to 3 teams, or I guess when LeBron decides it's the Super Bowl. Speaking of the Super Bowl, did you catch the Super Bowl? I think that it's really Yeah, it's really Boston and OKC have just loaded rosters for different reasons. I think Cleveland's done a good job, but I like you look at the game that the Knicks played against Cleveland. They had a lead, and it was early in the season. They weren't clearly as cohesive as they are now. um, but having said that, it's a tougher game to play, right? I think the Nico Harrison trade was. I'm not excusing that at all, but if people are having pause about paying a guy like Luka Doncic, maybe incorrectly, but you can see how much pressure the cap and the apron and all of these issues are putting on teams. And I think that you're just going to have a lot of imperfect trades, right? You're going to see things like trading for Mikal Bridges for 5 picks. Like that kind of gets baked into the value of some of these guys, even if, we're used to valuing it a little bit differently. And I think people are still coming to grips with just what that means for team building. And Boston and OKC have been projects years in the making. Um, whether it was by tanking for a million years or how long ago was the Shea Gilgeous Alexander trade? It's like 5 or 6 years now, right?
Um, yeah, 2019 that was made. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So that's a year before the Knicks hired Tibbs, right? And Leon, obviously. So you have that was I remember because that was the same day where Zion like destroyed Kevin Knox in summer league. Um, the like Tatum, I think was what a couple years before that, maybe the year. Yeah, I think Tatum was drafted the year before that. No, 2 years before that. So they're like a year or two ahead of the Knicks in terms of when they started really their builds. Other than that, I think they're pretty much on par with or better than any other team. And it's been complicated more by the apron and all of that. I think you get so few bites at the apple that even 2 years ago, right? Jeff was saying this, right? Like just because of like the Heat knocking off the 1 seed and all of that, it really felt like the Knicks weren't going to have too many better opportunities to make a run than that year when they ultimately lost the Heat. And give them credit for getting back to the second round this year again. Looks like they'll be in the thick of contention. Um, but you only get so many shots. So I definitely think that when people say, "Look, we're not at the point where you can just say be happy even if they don't win," the title is the expectation now. But to your point, um, the title should be the expectation going into every year. I think they built this roster. They probably looked at the deadline and say, "How can we give ourselves the best chance to contend?" They're not going to compromise flexibility, and um, because they haven't, barring injuries and those kind of things, they should be in contention. They should be able to just keep getting incrementally better. And based on this, front office's track record over the last few years, they're willing to make big moves. They're willing to make incremental moves, but they have had a pretty good trajectory of getting incrementally better. Maybe there's some quantum leap that they just won't be able to make. Maybe Brunson isn't a 1A or some shit like that. But I think they have a pretty good idea of what they're doing. And I also say this: there's a 0% chance Tibbs gets fired after this season, like unless they actually collapse and miss the playoffs. If and when the time comes, though, I don't think this is a team that is going to be like loyal to Tibbs in the sense that he's unfireable, right? Again, I will say this because people should not read this as he could be on the hot seat, maybe even going into next season. If they're hitting a wall in the playoffs for like 2 years in a row, I don't think this is a front office that's going to, they've been willing to trade players they have personal relationships with. They do right by them, right? They send them to good places. I think even Jericho Sims, they send him to a place that can use him. But and is obviously a solid team, pretty good organization. And so I think they would do right by Tibbs, but I also don't think they'd be afraid to move on. Um, just it won't happen this year or after this year, but in the future, if as we've discussed, if that is really what holds the Knicks back, I would have confidence that the front office is going to make the right call there, whichever way they need to go.
Yeah. Again, talked about this in the post game yesterday. I don't think there's anything to be they've made enough aggressive moves and moves that have been hard to make. That I don't think if you're in a series against Boston and just 4 fucking beatdowns, I wouldn't just assume, well, Tibbs keeping his job because everybody likes him. Like, I don't buy that. I think that's not reality. Now, concern might be, well, they just extended him, so are you going to go to Dolan and tell him eat the whole extension, and we're going to have to hire a new coach? I don't know. That's a separate thing, right? Like, that's its own talking point about the politics of having to fire somebody and how that works. But
and I think to their credit, I think this is hypothesizing. I'm sure that there have been times where it feels like there have been times when they've gotten Tibbs to change his philosophy, right? Where Leon may, have a sit down, so to speak, with Tibbs, right? I think he's good at, like, I would trust his ability to get that out of Tibbs, at that point. So
right. It's just a matter of, like, does it ever reach a point where you're like, I can't keep being the, like, guy that needs to come down here and be like, hey, what about playing those young guys a little bit more instead of Fournier? Well, what if we, this Precious thing, maybe, like, I'm not saying that Leon is telling him all these things directly, and those are the only reasons Tibbs has made changes. But it's hard not to believe that there has been conversations that have led to some of the changes that Tibbs has made, to his credit, that have resulted in better success for the Knicks on the court.
I think he probably brought Sam Rose once, and Sam Rose was talking about Miami, and Tibbs was like, if I give a fuck about Miami, I would be in Florida right now. And it wasn't long ago, I used to stay in the car, which is where you should still be.
As far as I'm concerned, that's where you should still be. Yeah, look, it is what it is. But yeah, look, the Knicks are good. They're a very good team. They're 36-18 at the All-Star break. That is the best record they've had, I think, since 1997. At this point in the season, this is a really, really good team. Like, they're on pace for a 55-win season. I don't know what else to say really other than that. Like, they're really good, and it's okay to appreciate that while still being concerned about the specter of playoff performance. Like, I think everybody understands that. So there are battles and wars to come that they will need to fight that we can argue about at that point. But it is important, I think, to appreciate what we have, given some of the bullshit we've endured over the years.
Yep, totally agree.
All right, Stacy, I know you need to get out of here. Let the people know where they can find you and plug anything that you'd like to plug.
You can find me at Stacy Patton 89. I will just plug all of the great work at the Strickland and all of the great work done by Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl MVP Jalen Hurts, that is, Vic Fangio, Jalix Hunt, Jalen Carter, Cooper DeJean, Zach Bond.
All right, we're not listing the entire Eagles fucking roster.
Go Birds. Thanks. And yeah, keep reading and listening. Appreciate all you guys.
Yeah, congrats to the Birds, and thank you for eliminating Satan. I have nothing to plug myself. I'll plug all the work at Strickland. Check it out. There been a lot of good pieces that have come out in the last few days. Bailey also did a really great video that I recommend checking out. That's on our YouTube channel. So definitely give all that a look. Thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online. Everybody enjoy your All-Star break. Please don't argue about the Knicks during the All-Star break. They're gone. They're gone for a week. Enjoy it. Enjoy the games tonight. You can watch the games tonight. Pure hate watches for everybody. No agendas other than the fun ones of hating on others. All right, that is our show for
Valentine's Day, everyone, too, by the way. Hope you
yep. Happy Valentine's Day.
Don't argue with the Knicks on Valentine's Day if you have a significant other. So,
all right, that is our show for today. Again, everybody enjoy the All-Star break, and I'll see you. Me and Prez will be recording Saturday morning, so I'll have the pod out at some point on Saturday. Peace.